I never have actors read from the script.
When you're auditioning?
Never. What I try and do is I try and find something that establishes to me that they're a good actor, meaning some bit of video, it can be a little short bit, like they can really, 30 seconds of something marvellous is enough. And then I talk to them, because in the end I have to feel that I'm going to be able to talk to them.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of it, I just have to trust that, yes, I was right that they are capable of good acting, and if they're capable of good acting, then between the two of us, we should be able to do it. Sort of
have you ever had a situation where in the first day you feel like, oh my God, this is not going to turn out the way that I hoped? Where do we go from here?
Yes.
With an actor?
With an actor, yes.
And what did you do?
It was a situation that I couldn't really do anything about it. And it was at the end of the first day I had tried everything that I knew how to try, and I knew it was never going to be any different. And it's very hard because you know that what you're doing is not going to go to the place where you think it's going to be marvellous. And really what I did was think, how can I limit the damage? How can I best use what I find very unattractive acting style for that character, that somehow a little word changes, little things, and that becomes the character more than the actor. But it was only a little bit successful.
It's I've never had to replace an actor after they were on film. We've had one or two people who were so badly behaved that they didn't even get to the set and had to be sent home. But I always feel like it's my I've made this commitment with that actor, and even if I made a bad decision and they're not going to be able to go in the direction that I want, it's that thing of what do they do well? What can they do well? What can I use from this character? And then look at the bigger story and say, okay, well, maybe this person isn't quite the focus of everything. There's other things going on in this movie. And I've occasionally had performances where half of the performance on screen is faces they make after I say cut. Because something new happens, and that's useful.
They relax, they stop acting, and suddenly they're okay.
And generally, because trust is such a big thing, sometimes it's that they just can't. They don't have an ear for what you want, and sometimes it's that they just don't trust anybody, including you, and they direct themselves. And they have an idea of the performance, and they can hear it in their ears, and you can give them 100 directions. And you won't be able to tell take 1 from 6 because it's note for note the same. And then you really have to do some kind of mental rewriting, of okay, this is all I'm going to get. It's a given. It's like it's a cloudy day and we only have 1 day to shoot this. And I wanted sun. How do I make it work with a cloudy day? It's a hard thing, especially if you're up the Orinoco River. And you don't want the mood on the set to go to zero, because there's quite a bit of acting I find in directing. It is a performance. One of the main things that I feel like I've gotten good at over the years is I've made features in 4 weeks that were full 2-hour movies or whatever. Is giving the actors the illusion that there's no time pressure. You don't want actors feeling like, you better get it, or else, we're behind the 8 ball again, and we're going to have to start ripping pages out of the script or whatever. So I've found that as soon as there's time pressure, I actually slow down and kind of take the actors aside and say, just mess with something new here, and that distracts them from the fact that, you know, the first AD and the production manager are slitting their wrists, and, you know, people are on the phone and stuff like that, because actors shouldn't have to think about that. And it's a hard thing, because you have your day in your head. How much planning of the day, of the attack of the day, do you do? Or for instance, I know directors who the first thing they do is say, okay, guys, get up in the van. Let's kind of block this out and do it a couple times. And I'm going to walk around with a cinematographer, and we're going to figure out how we're going to shoot this. Do you start that way, or do you have your kind of blocking and your camera angles all set up?
It depends entirely on the film, and it depends entirely on the scene within the particular film. I've done things where every shot has been storyboarded before we start, and that's exactly what's been shot. To there hasn't been a storyboard at all, and half of it is, well, let's find out what this is going to be on the day, on the scene, and everything in between.
And you've planned for that with the amount of time you have to develop.
Sometimes yes. Sometimes, well, the track, for example, I had a strong intention to storyboard the whole thing, but in the end, it took a month to do the locations, and I didn't have any time to storyboard it, and so none of it was. But mostly, I take the approach on the particular film, what it ought to do, what ought I do with this, and how ought I approach it.
And do you have a more or less specific kind of understanding with your cinematographer going in?
Yeah. I tend to work with cinematographers in batches.
A couple films in a row.
A couple of films, maybe 3, maybe 4. You get to know them, and you get to work with them, and like them, and they know how you work. I can be quite pernickety about the shots. I can be quite,
you figure
it out. Show me something. Yep, thanks. Good, great, perfect. You know what we want. Or it has to be exactly like this. And
I tend to, because rarely do I get to work with the same cinematographer two times in a row. So I'm often I've worked with some great cinematographers, but once, and then they can't afford to work with me, or it just doesn't work out again. I tend to do 2 things with them. One is a philosophical, what's the philosophy of the look of the movie? And we may look at still pictures together, occasionally a movie, but usually still pictures are easier to talk about than the movie. And it, like in Honey Dripper, which some of you just saw, there was a progression of lenses. And I never tell a lens to a cinematographer. I'm not that literate in lenses, in optics. But I said to them, basically this is going to start whenever we're inside the Honey Dripper. It's going to be a wide lens to emphasize how empty it is, because it's about a club that's not doing well. And so it looks like, oh my God, look at all that empty space. Nobody is coming into this club, and that guy's way down there, and there's one other drinker, and they're losing money like crazy. And then it's all going to lead to this finale at night when the place is jammed, and we'll go to a long lens for 2 reasons. One, to make it look more crowded, but also so we can use only 50 extras instead of 100, but the lens will cram them together, and you won't notice the space, and it will feel like, oh my God, everybody in Alabama came that night. So there's sometimes it's a color progression. Sometimes it's from very drab to very colorful or whatever. Sometimes in Mate 1 with Haskell Wexler, we just decided, okay, we're not going to put any filters except for very neutral density things. We're not going to make it look like old daguerreotypes or anything like that. But this is a coal mining town. Everything, it might be clean, but it's been washed with lye soap 1,000 times. So everything is going to be faded, but that's the art director's job, to fade it. And we're going to have tiny little bits of red. Very tiny little bits of red, but no other red in the whole palette. So you talk that palette thing. And then there's generally, because we're on this low budget thing, a very, very specific thing okay, tell your guys today, here's what we're going to do. This is the order we're going to shoot. We've talked about we don't want to shoot this in the morning because the skyscraper that's not supposed to be there in 1900 is going to lay a shadow on the scene, or we'll be looking bang into the sun. So we've talked about time of day and cinematography. But here's my plan of attack. And then you tell me, cinematographer, if it's all the same to me, do you want to start this direction or that direction? You know, and then the last thing I do is I usually go through like a one-liner of all the scenes in the movie, and I write almost like an emotional thing, you know, something like tense, you know, or tentative, or oppressive, or whatever for every scene, and just say, look, you know, I'm going to forget what I gave you, but as you're planning how you are going to treat this thing, these should also, this is an emotional thing that I want out of the scene. You make that out of light. You know, anything you can help me to do with light and camera position. And I'm usually pretty specific about the camera position, but it's, you know, I'll tell you the camera position and you tell me when to do it, when the light's going to be good. Or if it's not going to be good, and maybe we should shoot it on another day.
You work with many different cinematographers, but I do notice that your composer tends to be fairly the same one.
Yeah, we got lucky. The guy who's composed 16 of the 17 movies, the other we didn't have any composed music, was a guy named Mason Daring, who I met because on my first film, which I made for $40,000, the crew who I was hiring, who had only shot commercials in Boston, thought we should have a lawyer present when we did the deal, you know, the no money deal that we were doing for the thing. And my car broke down on the way to the meeting. And the lawyer said, oh, yeah, I'm good with cars. I'll give you a ride back. And as he's driving me back, he said, so what are you going to do for music for this movie? And I said, well, I can't afford the rights to any songs that already exist. And he said, handed me a CD. I'm a folk singer, you know, and the other good thing is that I do law for free for my musician friends, so every musician in Boston owes me a favor. I said, okay, I'll listen to your thing. And he and this other woman were really very good folk singers. And then he fixed my car. So I said, this guy's worth knowing, you know. And Mason Daring's a musicologist, you know, good guitar player, and turned out to be, you know, didn't compose much music for that movie, but helped me find people in Boston and this and that and put together a soundtrack. And about 3 movies later with us, he started getting some other better paying work, and he called me one day, he says, I don't have to be a lawyer anymore. I never wanted to be a lawyer, I can be a composer. So the great thing with Mason is that I'll send him a script. I say, it looks like we have the money for this thing. You know how badly we pay. You know, are you interested? And he usually says, oh, God. And he grumbles a little and he says, yeah, I'm interested. And then we have this kind of mostly sending music back and forth conversation. And so there's, you know, in the case of Matewan, we listen to a lot of period music, a lot of, you know, music that might be in the movie, a lot of, you know, hill music. And we decided that the audio palette of that film would be all these instruments that you heard in traditional hill music, but not the banjo for this particular thing. Partly because of Flatt and Scruggs and Bonnie and Clyde, but also just the banjo was a happier instrument. And this just was a long dissolve movie, and the banjo was a very percussive, fast cut kind of instrument. So we took the banjo out, and that actually changed the tenor of it. But he really immersed himself in that music, found good players, you know, knew how to write in that vernacular. I wrote some lyrics. He, you know, made them into songs or whatever. And we've done that on you know, movie after movie after movie. So it's this kind of mutual exploration of what's the music going to be in this movie, and then, you know, we start, you know. Couple times I've even asked him to write something before we shot, some score before we shot, to give me a rhythm. If any of you have seen Brother from Another Planet, which I think is playing here at some point, David Strathairn and I played the original Men in Black before Tommy Lee Jones. And there's a point where we're chasing after this black alien, and I wanted it to be to a certain rhythm, so I had Mason, because it was basically an MOS shot with no dialogue, we could just have him write a piece for it, crank it up on some street speakers, and David and I could move to that music. So it's great to have a collaborator like that who can do it before, he can do it after, and then he also knows a lot of really good musicians, and I get to come to the recording sessions, and I can't read music, I have no musical vocabulary, but I know the story, and we always show the musicians the scenes that they're playing to, and I explain the emotion of the scene, and then I give them one of these things like unresolved, and musicians love that shit, because they hear, chords and keys and all that kind of stuff all the time, and they can do that. But they're emotional players, just like actors are emotional, And sure enough, Duke Levine or a guitar player, or a harmonica player, will play to the screen, play to the scene, and it's always so much better than if we just write notes down. And who do you work with mostly?
Well, I also have a collaboration with one particular composer right from the very beginning, a guy called Graham Tardif, who, in fact, the only music he does is for my films. He doesn't do any other music for anybody else.
So he makes a big, expensive living and drives a Cadillac.
No. He works. He's in charge of the emergency response disaster unit of Save the Children, I think. And so whenever there's a catastrophe in the world somewhere, that's where he is. So then I have to find him. I remember once I had to find him. He'd been in the jungle for almost a year. And he eventually responded months later, yes, we're going to do a film, and he came out and did the film.
Terrific.
And the shorthand that you develop over years is just fantastic, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time.
And the music can be very, very different.
Yes.
You make such different, each time it's a very different world.
Yeah. This time it's going to be orchestral, this time it's going to be a band, this time it's going to be electronic,
It's such an important voice in the film. It's the one thing that I think is really, really hard as a screenwriter to pass on. You can tell people it's going to be this kind of music, but it makes when it works, it makes such a difference. I mean, I'm sure you've had cues which were wonderful cues when you heard them, and then you put them against the scene, and it just doesn't work
at all.
And sometimes it sounds better with nothing, and sometimes you take out 6 instruments and just one of them works or whatever. There's some strange alchemy that, sometimes the song's too good, it's too interesting. It's fighting against the scene. And other times it just is dissonant or whatever, and then every once in a while you hear it could be a rock and roll song or something you that's already recorded, or it could be some score, and you put it against the picture and it just lifts the scene up. And the great thing about a good composer is they know that too. So even if they busted their butt and stayed up late and wrote a great piece of music, and you say, it just doesn't work, they say, okay. Next movie, I'll stick it in and see if it works with that. Sometimes it does.
I've been waiting for a while for a flat spot, but there hasn't been a flat spot. But I think it's time where we can maybe get some questions from the audience. Yes.
Rehearsing actors.
Rehearsing actors. I personally don't rehearse actors. I write a bio of every character, send it to them. They got the script. I'm available on telephone or in person if they want to know more about it. And some actors really do call me up, and we have some back and forth about their characters, and maybe 2 words will change. But I hope they understand more of what they're getting into and who their character is. And basically I do a very, very no acting please blocking rehearsal. So the camera operator knows, where they're going and what's going to be difficult and can make some measurements. And then I start shooting. And then I may adjust quite a bit after we start shooting. But there's something that I really like about the shock of the new, the first take when actors look at each other and say those lines and those characters for the first time. It's the, you know, I just did a little acting thing for the Directors Guild here, and you do 10 takes of something, it's really hard to forget how the scene ends when you're starting it. So I've had movies where one or two of the characters, 90% of what you see of them is the first take. In Brother from Another Planet, because we only had 4 weeks to shoot the movie and it was an ambitious movie, there were only 3 takes of anything. I don't think we ever went much more than 3 takes. But I certainly didn't rehearse it. It helped that my main character was mute, so he could never blow a line. But you know, sometimes we actually changed the physical stuff quite a bit. But you know, I finally think that good actors, experienced actors, will do the work mentally, and then some of the things, the discovering things that you would do in rehearsal, I want to see them do it, you know, in front of the camera. There's a great story. Rolf worked with Miles Davis, and there's maybe an apocryphal story, probably true actually, of they're on the road with a small band, and Miles Davis is walking down the hotel corridor, and he hears one of his players, like, doing riffs, and he recognizes a little bit of one of their songs, and bangs on the door, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well,
what are you doing?"
"Yeah, I'm practicing." You know, and Miles says, you know, "I pay you to practice on stage." You know, and for the kind of music he was doing, that great discovery that can happen in jazz, that moment that nobody expected, but when it comes together, it's so perfect, it's not going to happen if you rehearse it. Or it may happen in the rehearsal and never happen again.
It's one of the great frustrations of filmmaking is that very often the very first block through is the best that it's ever going to get, ever going to be. And so you spend your time working out how to capture that first time that it's really good. And sometimes, you know, like Alexander's project, Gary Sweet didn't want to rehearse at all. In fact, he wanted nothing to do with anything because he had to watch this tape and respond to it. And so I took that as a cue, and he didn't read the script. He didn't, you know, for months he did theatre, other stuff, and I took it as a cue, and we spent maybe 4 or 5 hours setting up a shot without him in the room, making it foolproof. That we could you know, not never have to rehearse with him, and 85 to 90% of what you see is the very in the film is the very first time his character ever saw what was on the screen. We got it first take every time, and you know, at one point I thought, I think he's going to vomit. I think he's going to vomit, and he almost did. And he came off, he staggered off afterwards. He said, I thought I was going to throw up then, I thought I was going to... And you would never get that if you rehearsed, and you'd never get that sort of authenticity. Yeah.
And somehow in his process, though,
yes.
He read the script, and he did whatever he had to do that he knew who he was. Yeah. He knew who that character was. Just put me in a situation. I'm always telling actors, because we do a lot of ensemble movies. Some people have just one little function in a movie. And I always say to them, look, you know, I know you're a day player. You're in a, you know, 1 3/8 page scene. When you walk off screen, and you'll know when you walk off screen because the camera ain't following you, I want it to feel like the camera could follow you, and there's an interesting movie to be seen if we follow you. That you're going somewhere to do something, you know. And there's a very famous story of actor in the late 40s, character actor who runs into a friend who's another character actor, and he says, "What are you up to?" And he says, "Oh, I have this great part. It's a new play by a really, really interesting young playwright named Tennessee Williams. And you know, what's it called? It's called A Streetcar Named Desire." What do you play in it? He said, well, I play a doctor who comes all the way from Baltimore to help a lady in distress. And if you remember the play, at the very end, there's a guy who runs a loony bin who's come and says, come with me, come with me. Actor says, oh, that sounds cool. What's the play about? It's about a doctor who comes all the way from Baltimore to help a lady in distress. Now, internally, you don't want to take over the stage at that point because Marlon Brando will punch you in the face. But internally, you better think that that's what the play is about, or you're just going to be, who's this schmuck on the stage? They get the guy who pulls the curtain to come and act. But if you're on there and you're a doctor, the important thing happening on that stage is helping this woman who seems truly distressed at least get out of this room. And I think that rehearsal, in theater is a very, very different thing, than it is in movies. And movies, you know what? You get to blow your lines. In theater, you don't. And as I said before, if your acting is good and you blow your lines, big deal. Do it again. Eventually, you'll get it.
Okay, I get a sense that if I ask one more question, we might be here for perhaps all night, and people have other movies to go to. There are some other great films on this evening. So please join me in thanking Rolf de Heer and John Sayles.